Welcome, Big Ten fans. This is Big Ten Ted Live. Hello, everyone. It is a Thursday night, and welcome in to Big Ten Ted Live. Excited about the show that we've got on tap for you tonight. It is about welcoming Washington, laying out the welcome rug, and letting the Huskies come trotting on in, because tonight we are talking to Tomashoff, Sports Illustrated, Fanside, and the co-host of the brand new Locked On Huskies podcast. We're going to be talking, Oregon had their moment in the sun. Now it's time to talk about the Washington Huskies. So he's going to be coming in to talk about Washington's move to the Big Ten. We're going to be breaking that down from start to finish here tonight. Remember, a great way to be involved, whether you've got a question for me, whether you've got a question for Rome, and a great way is in the chat. Super chats are definitely going to get read, but looking through all the questions in the chats tonight, get interactive. It is an interactive program here tonight. Some other housekeeping to kind of take care of. We've got our Big Ten prediction show coming up on Wednesday, August 23rd, looking right around 8 Eastern time, 7 o'clock Central. We're going to bring in on a lot of Big Ten guests, breaking down my predictions for the Big Ten football season. A lot of toss-up games here in 2023, and the potential for some really good toss-up games that could go either way in the Big Ten. So predicting this is kind of a bit difficult, but I'm going to put it all out on the line. Wednesday, August 23rd, looking like 8 o'clock Eastern. A little bit of an earlier time because there's kind of a lot to get to. We're talking about the whole season and breaking it down. So tonight we are talking Washington Huskies, and right now I am pleased to be joined by Roman Tomashoff from Sports Illustrated Fanside, the brand new Locked On Huskies podcast. And Roman, a couple of weeks ago, it was officially announced Oregon was coming. We'll put them to the side for now. Washington was coming as well. And when I was out there, I was on vacation and kind of had to do some work while I was on vacation. Where were you at? What were you doing? And what was your original thought when you saw Washington was coming to the Big Ten?
So that was a fun morning for me, because living here on the West Coast, I woke up at about 7 o'clock. And for me, I've got a group of buddies that I go down to the gym with, and from 8:30 to 10 every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we play basketball. And I looked at my phone and I said, I'm not playing any basketball today, am I? Because I woke up right as the whole campaign of, all the steam is gone. Everyone's going to get together and sign this GOR and make this happen. And so all my articles, which you can read at Inside the Huskies at si.com/college/Washington, I had to change the one that I wrote that morning 3 separate times, because it was, okay, how are they going to make this work? And then, looks like they're on the verge of joining the Big Ten. And it's like, okay, what are the positives and negatives of joining the Big Ten? And then all of a sudden it's, this is going to happen. So, all right, at least we got this settled. Because this is something that, and credit to Brett McMurphy with Action Sports,
yep.
Because I actually heard something very similar to what Brett put in his piece last June, that right after the USC and UCLA application and everything that happened with that, I heard that Oregon and Washington were vetted and cleared last June. And credit to the people that I heard that from, and I really appreciate them. And Brett McMurphy basically confirmed that, and that the Big Ten presidents and chancellors said, we don't really want to split the revenue pot any further at this point. And then, of course, the whole Colorado thing happens. Not like they're relevant for any reason whatsoever. Yeah, I'm taking shots on the way out.
Here we go. Let's do it.
That's the whole reason you brought me on, right?
Exactly.
So it's, once Colorado's move happened, it was kind of like, okay, it's just a matter of when at this point. Because no disrespect to some of the other programs in the conference. And it's something that I talked about on the Locked On Huskies podcast, where, and this is just a little insight into the Apple TV deal, which is apparently going to be based on subscriptions. And something that a good friend of mine who's a big soccer fan talked to me about. And what they said was, Lionel Messi was able to get Apple TV up to about 800,000 subscriptions for their MLS season pass, which is a huge number. And there are no bigger athletes in the world than Lionel Messi. But there's no way that if that's what he did, that especially a conference without USC and UCLA could get to that 2.5 million number that was reported that Apple TV was asking for to get up to $35 million a year. And especially when, you take into account everything that is going to be in play for the Huskies once this new media deal goes into effect in 2030, it's no competition, truly. It's the 35 million river number that the athletic department's going to scoff at that and say, yeah, no, we're going to go get at least double from the Big Ten for a full share.
Here's where I was. Oregon and Washington always going to come to the Big Ten. And I know it was reported that up until the last minute, a lot of people saying it was a last minute shift with the mindset of Oregon and Washington. But I, to be honest with you, to be very blunt, I don't buy that for a second. I always bought it that Oregon and Washington were somehow going to make their way into the Big Ten. I just could not see them playing Pac-12 football in 2024. And then if Oregon and Washington weren't going to be there, the conference was going to very quickly disintegrate, and that's exactly what happened. And this Apple deal, Messi is one thing, but then you compare that to Pac-12 football. There's a big difference there in getting those subscriptions, obviously, with everything that kind of went down. So let's kind of now progress into some other topics here. In the Big Ten country, we love to tailgate. We love to tailgate. We love to throw them back before a game. Another thing we love to do, especially here in the Midwest, we like to drive up on the weekend. We like to go up to the lake. We like to take our boats on the lake. Let's combine them all and call it sailgating. That's what you guys got for a pregame tradition out there in Washington. Let Big Ten country know why everybody should be pumped about sailgating.
Well, first of all, welcome to Mott Lake. Little backstory about myself here. I'm originally from Los Angeles. There is nothing quite like the atmosphere of when the Huskies are good. Because Sailgating, as I told you a little bit before the show, sailgating is just the coolest thing on the planet. You can it's because right here, for all of you who aren't necessarily very familiar with the geography of the Northwest, Husky Stadium sits right on Lake Washington. Yeah. So Lake Washington connects to the Pacific Ocean, and it's very easy to take a boat in. And not only can you tailgate on the water outside the stadium, but you can actually pull your boat up and tie your boat up and park it and then get inside and go to the game.
Nice.
And there's nothing like that quite in the world of college football. I know we talked a little about like Baylor's got something like that, but it's on a river. I know there's a big kind of feud going on between Husky fans and Tennessee fans, where Tennessee fans say, "Oh no, the setting we have down here is way better." I disagree very, very strongly. It's Washington. They call it the greatest setting in college football for a reason. There truly are no sites in college football like there are, especially on a sunny day like we have have had these last couple of weeks here in Seattle. Doesn't rain nearly as much as you think it does up here. I'm also going to say that it's a bit of a myth. Yes, it gets gloomy in October, November, whatever. Those summer months up here, there's really nothing like it.
Okay, let's talk about that, because that kind of gets in and progresses into our next topic, the greatest setting in college football. Now, maybe I'm just not up to date on my Pacific Coast football, but I didn't really know that this was kind of a thing. I knew BYU, of course, has a great setting over there, but kind of explain to us where the mantra kind of came from with the greatest setting in college football and what kind of goes behind that.
So it's a bit of a marketing thing that the UW athletic department has put into effect. But it's really, if you just look up the University of Washington football stadium, look up Husky Stadium on Google Images, and they're just some of the most beautiful photography you've ever seen, because the stadium literally sits right next to the water. And the Pacific Northwest is just a beautiful area to live in as it is. All the evergreen trees around, the University of Washington campus as a whole sits just like it's on the outskirts of downtown Seattle, and just a really, really great area anyways. But then basically the entire athletic department, all the fields are right down next to the water. Right. And it's just such a picturesque setting as it is. And when the Huskies are good, and there are 68 to 70,000 people in the stadium being loud. There's also no louder setting in college football than the University of Washington.
Now I'm going to fire back for just a minute here, because you kept on saying when they're good. From the Midwest, we have fan bases like Nebraska and Ohio State. It's people who will support it's been very easy, by the way, to support Ohio State. So maybe that's not the best example.
Yeah, those fans had no trouble at all.
Nebraska, we can maybe stick with Nebraska. You said when they're good. When we kind of look at maybe West Coast, Pacific Coast football, they see stadiums like a Stanford and a Cal. We'll get to that in just a minute, where they're half empty, where maybe stadiums aren't full unless their teams are 7-1 or 6-2 or undefeated or whatever. What's it like when Washington is maybe 3-5? What's the fan support and what's the fan base like overall in Washington?
So it can get a little tough. I won't lie. And this is something where, for me, I'm 25 years old. So I was 3 years old before the Huskies played Ohio State in the Rose Bowl on January 1st, 2019. I hadn't seen them play in a Rose Bowl since I was 3 years old, so I don't even really count that. Mm-hmm. There have been some tough stretches of Husky football, but I know it's, again, something we talked about a little bit before the show. The 80s, the 90s, the Don James era of Husky football, that place is sold out every single weekend. And we saw it when the Michigan State game, for all the Spartan fans out there, that was just the true return of what Husky football can be. And with this team now that I know Big Ten fans have to pay attention now, this is going to be a top 10 team in the country this season. Yes. So this place is going to be sold out every single week. And now that it's a bit of an issue with, I would say, some West Coast, not even just when it comes to college football. Look at UCLA, for example. And I will take all the shots in the world at UCLA. But it's something where there are times where the fan support can be a little bit lax, but the nice thing about social media is you won't see it on Twitter. Husky fans on Twitter are rabid, and I'm sorry for I don't blame me for anything that some of these people say on Twitter, but there always will be a rabid fan base for the Huskies. But sometimes it can get a little tough because there's some areas in the Pacific Northwest that aren't necessarily very close, and it's something I know we'll talk about when we get to the Apple Cup as well.
Sure.
But it's when the Huskies aren't great, you'll get like a 70% capacity for most games. But when they're good, oh man, there really is nothing like it.
Greatest setting in college football, as they say, as we kind of preface this segment with. So do you think that now, instead of, like, say you get a Washington team that's 4-4, maybe 5-3, something like that, where you see maybe that 70% capacity that we've seen, but now instead of a 4-4 Washington team playing Arizona or playing Cal, now all of a sudden they're playing Wisconsin, they're playing Michigan, teams like that. Do you think, at least in the early years, that's going to generate more excitement, even if Washington isn't maybe like they are this year, a top 10 team?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's something that it's something we talked about a little bit on Inside the Huskies last week when we talked about the move to the Big Ten. It's because there were people who screaming about, oh, it's tradition, and it's so special to only be able to play it, I don't know, for example, Ohio State once every 30 years.
Yeah.
But doesn't it almost make it more special to kind of develop a rivalry with a school like that? And even when, it's not like they're ever going to be true rivals. I'm well aware of everything that goes on with that. But it's going to be so much more special for the foreseeable future because the Huskies were starting. I'll give an example of, in somewhat recent memory, for Nebraska fans, when they had the home and home with Nebraska in the Jake Locker era. And I remember Nebraska came in here and just stomped on the Huskies in the Taylor Martinez era, which we don't really talk about anymore.
Team Magic, baby.
Oh yeah. But that, even then, I know I keep using this same expression, but it's true. Because that stadium was sold out for that game, and I just remember watching it on TV, still living in Los Angeles, and the camera well is shaking, and it's just you can't get a steady shot, and that's what Husky football really is. That's how loud it can get inside Husky Stadium. And yeah, even a middle-of-the-road Husky team would generate that kind of energy for any of these bigger schools in the Big Ten to come and play here.
Well, I'm excited about that atmosphere because here's the thing, and this is going to kind of preface into the Stanford and Cal discussion that we're going to have here going forward is we love our environments. We love rockin' stadiums here. The Iowa's Kinnick is underrated. And of course, when anybody maybe from outside the Big Ten kind of looks in, they look at the 100,000, they look at the Ohio's, the Horseshoe, they look at Penn State, they look at Michigan. Those stadiums are rocking every single Saturday. There's no farm where there's 40% capacity over here. There's no Cal, where half the bowl is filled up. There's nothing like that. So I'm pumped that we get what we get with Oregon. I'm pumped that we get what we get with Washington. UCLA could be a little bit of a different story. My hope with UCLA is that they're good early. But I'm also, the thing with the Rose Bowl and the thing with UCLA is I could very well see, depending on how the schedule shakes out, if you get a fan base that travels like in Nebraska, oh my gosh, you could see that thing 80% red. 80% red. And that might be putting it mildly. Over there, but it doesn't sound like that might be an issue with somebody like Washington. So I'm glad that we have a fan base coming in like the Washington Huskies. All right, let's talk about Stanford and Cal and potential more Big Ten expansion. They're making headlines right now, doing anything and everything. They're kind of partnering a little bit with SMU, trying to get over there into the ACC. But there were some other reports recently that said they're making a last-ditch effort to make their way, even as a partial member, possibly into the Big Ten Conference. From my knowledge, I don't think Washington has very big rivalries with the Golden Bears or with the Cardinal. What are kind of your thoughts? Would you like to see them maybe for travel purposes, or kind of what's your stance going forward on Stanford and Cal?
Travel purposes, yeah, absolutely. That would be great to have both of their schools. And there are certain things involving Stanford and Cal where I think that joining the Big Ten might be just the infusion that those fan bases need sometimes to actually just get back in the stadium. It's something that if people want to go back and watch Washington Cal from 2022 when the Huskies played down there, it's something Marshawn Lynch said. He said that he misses seeing that stadium sold out and rocking, which is something that during the time when him and Aaron Rodgers spent there, that's something that happened. And yeah, no, it hasn't happened much in recent years, but I think that there's a path for that. I don't necessarily know how well it's going to work out right now, because I think that that's something that doesn't really necessarily fall on what Stanford and Cal want at this point. It's what does the rest of the conference want?
Yeah, that's a whole different discussion. And here, kind of right on cue, HD90 Dog with Roman's West Coast view. Does he think there will be any more Pac teams added? And we're kind of elaborating on that. And we kind of talked about the show before this about Stanford and about Cal. You can be the greatest academic institutions, and there is no debating how good UC Berkeley and how good Stanford are on the academic side. They're as good as it gets in the country. Whether though that university plays sports or not, they are as good as it gets. And you can be as good academically. You can be as good at the Olympic sports. And once again, Stanford is right there. But it all comes down to, we know it's money. We know it's football. We know it's television. And Stanford and Cal just don't provide any of that.
So the one thing I will say is that I think Stanford is trying now. I think they're going to try to make a push. They just brought on a new head coach in Troy Taylor, and this might shock people, but at last I looked, they were still a top 15 recruiting class in the country for the class of 2024. And I know it's just a lot of volume at this point, but if that's something that they want to do and they actually want to try, yeah. Why wouldn't you take Stanford? Because I know that that's something when all these discussions were happening around Washington and Oregon, there was a significant portion of the Washington fan base that was trying to run down Oregon saying, oh, like their academics aren't on par with what the Big Ten is looking for. And one of the jokes was it would be really funny if Stanford just overtook Oregon and took that spot, which we as just the Washington media also would have just found hilarious. But no, it's something where I can absolutely see a scenario where that happens. I'm kind of iffy on if we see it within the next year or two, because I know that there's it's a whole different conversation, and I know they're not a West Coast school like the question is, but what does Notre Dame do in all this? That's another shoe that
Can of worms opened. All right.
I'm sorry. I know it needs to be said, though.
I grew up in the Midwest in a Catholic household, and I know all about Notre Dame and their fan base. And I talked about it on a live program last night, and I could talk about it until I'm blue in the face of how Notre Dame, just the hypocrisy of all this thing where they're trying to get Stanford and Cal into the ACC, yet when people ask them, oh, we'll take them if you join with football. Well, whoa, that's a little bit too much. So that whole dynamic can be saved for another time. But let's kind of dive into rivalries a little bit. You briefly mentioned it. When people maybe think of Washington, they might think of the last game of the year. They might think of Washington State. I had Doug Scott from the QB11 show on last week about Oregon. He said something where that Oregon State game was almost like a little brother, like a Michigan State type of thing over there. Boy, we're maybe not doing a lot for our Michigan State fanhood here tonight. But anyway, that's a different story. Maybe
for later too, won't we?
We will. Different story for a different time. But it's Oregon and Washington. That seems to be the premier rival for both of these teams. Can you confirm that point?
No, that's absolutely true. All you have to do is search Oregon and Washington on Twitter, or just put if you as a Big Ten fan just truly just pure comedy, just say one or the other. I don't care if you just want to start a fight. Just say that. And there will be people coming out of the woodwork one way or the other, because especially as somebody who has grown up watching and covering Washington, yep. All you need to say to trigger Oregon fans is that Washington has 2 national championships and Oregon has 0. And just chaos ensues.
Oregon is, and we'll maybe get in touch on this, because this is very interesting. This is not, like you said, this is not a secondary rivalry. This is a primary rivalry. Both teams in 2023 ranked in the top 15 in the AP poll to kind of start things out. And I'm really excited to see where things are going to go for the Ducks and the Huskies, because the more I kind of look into it, and I'm going to, over the course of the year, really watch more of this West Coast football, especially the teams that are coming into the conference, the more I kind of look at it, the more Oregon and Washington really excites me. Especially maybe in recent years, pretty much ever since Oregon's been good the last 20 years or so, how has this rivalry gone? How has it split? Who kind of holds the advantage, especially in recent history?
So in recent history, Oregon does hold the advantage, because it's something we talked about a little bit earlier. This is Washington was down for a while, and then Steve Sarkisian kind of started off. He didn't really have a great track record of beating Oregon. Chris Peterson got them back there. There's a very, very wonderful string of the Huskies in back-to-back years beating them 70-21, and I believe it was 38-3. So there were a couple of really fun Husky blowouts in there, and then Oregon once again held the advantage until the Huskies went down to Autzen last year and upset the number 6 team in the country at that point, 37-34. So Oregon, in terms of recent records, still holds the title, but if you go back and watch that game, Kalen DeBoer and his coaching staff just figured something out, and it's something where I'm not going to say anything about it moving forward, because we'll get to that in a couple of months here, and I'm a huge jinx, so anything that I put out into the world is going to be wrong anyways. Yeah. So it's something where I feel like there might be another shift coming here very soon.
A lot of stuff that we could maybe dive into there in just a little bit, but I want to cover one more thing as it pertains to the rivalry. Where do you think the Washington State series ends up? Do you think that this is something that can be played still at the last game of the season, kind of like a Florida State kind of deal out of conference? Or do you think that this is more likely to maybe move up to a September game like Iowa and Iowa State have been playing for the longest time?
I personally think that it's going to end up being a September game, because that's going to be so much easier for both teams. There's a lot of times where coming either way, there's just a lot of mountain passes that you got to get through. And usually it's played on the day after Thanksgiving. And when the Apple Cup is played after Thanksgiving, sometimes, especially when the Huskies have to go out to Pullman, there's a lot of snow involved in that. So it's something where if you can play that game in September, it might be pretty hot in Pullman. But I think that is just so much easier on both teams travel-wise, especially because there's been some talk of this not being home and home anymore and playing at a neutral site. But that would be extremely unfair to Washington State in that relationship, because the neutral site would be Lumen Field where the Seahawks play. where the Huskies have played an entire season of home games in the past. So,
that's very interesting to see how that all could go down. And like I said, it's looking like Washington State, along with Oregon State, are going to end up in the Mountain West. So it's not a lot of times you see a Power 5, let's call it as it is, a Power 2 team in this situation travel to a Group of 5 Mountain West team. So that could, I know there's some things that are going to be obviously grandfathered in with their long history, but it's just something that you don't really see a lot as you continue to kind of go down the line. Let's talk about, you mentioned Kalen DeBoer, and I want to talk about Kalen DeBoer because coming over from Fresno State, I believe is the head coach here at Washington. Things look like they're going on the up. Chris Peterson had things going good, right? A college football playoff appearance. You look at multiple 10-win seasons, took a little bit of a dip, it looked like, under Jimmy Lake, but it looks like it's coming back up. Now with Washington in the Big Ten, I thought maybe Kalen DeBoer was mentioned with some of these coaching searches around the country. Now with Washington in the Big Ten, it looks like the future could be very bright with DeBoer at the helm.
No, you hit the nail on the head there. Kalen DeBoer is someone who my first year covering the team in a professional capacity was 2021. And there are a few things that I've seen just be such a drastic difference than that I saw from the 2021 Jimmy Lake, John Donovan offense to the 2022 Kalen DeBoer, Ryan Grubb offense. Because it's a lot of the same people. So it's basically everything is the exact same except for the quarterback, which I know we'll get to Michael Penix. Yeah. And it's just the change up there was just night and day. And the things that Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb are able to do on the offensive side of the ball are just fantastic to watch. And I'm very curious to see if, somebody has to go to Iowa or Nebraska in November, how that might have to play out. But just the passing attack that these guys have instilled here with the wide receivers, that is arguably the best group in the country. I truly believe that they can go toe-to-toe with Ohio State on any day of the week in that room, that there's something really, really special happening here in Seattle.
Boy, you talked about Kalen DeBoer was the OC at Indiana, I believe, back in 2019. And then Michael Penix, of course, the transfer quarterback from Indiana. Let's talk about this year's Huskies because so Michael Penix, 2020, had a great year. That COVID-shortened year was a 6-2 season at Indiana. Had a great year. And then coming into that 2021 season, I thought he was probably one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten Conference. And that quickly went south after he threw multiple interceptions against Iowa to start things off. Injuries kind of held him back, and he ends up entering the transfer portal. And all of a sudden, you go from that to a Heisman dark horse kind of guy in Michael Penix. What's been the source of this turnaround? I always thought Michael Penix was good, but it seems like he's taken it to a new, complete level once he's gotten to Seattle.
The biggest thing is health, really. Michael Penix, before last season, had never played an entire season of college football. Obviously, he struggled with a couple ACLs. He had a shoulder injury as well. And then last year, the offensive line only let him get sacked 5 times through 13 games. And that it's like, I think the turnaround is simple as that. And one thing that I know there's a lot of familiarity in the offense. One thing when we talked to him the other day after practice, he said, yeah, I've been running this offensive scheme for 5-6 years. So there's also that level of familiarity. And then no offense to the talent at Indiana at the time, because I know there are a couple other coaches that were also there, Nick Sheridan being the primary one, who's the tight ends coach here now, were on that coaching staff. But the talent comparison from what Indiana had to what Washington has right now, there's like really, we look at Rome Odunze, who I truly believe is going to be a top 20 pick in the upcoming draft. Jalen McMillan, who also went for 1,000 yards last year. Jalen Polk, a transfer wide receiver from Texas Tech, who had almost 700 yards last year on 40 catches. There's so much talent there, and that's without even talking about the guys who people really do need to know when it comes to this season. And these are all guys that Michael Penix can throw the ball to. Jeremy Bernard, who, again, shots at Michigan State.
Whoa, sorry, Sparty fans. This is going south real quick.
Jeremy Bernard has had the second most impressive camp of anybody in that room, behind redshirt freshman Denzel Boston, who is a very, very underrated recruit, but has a very similar body type to Rome Odunze. And there are a few guys in the country that can go up and high point the ball like he can. Super athletic dude. And while he might not necessarily make a ton of impact in the stat sheet this season, come 2024, that's another guy that people are going to need to keep their eyes on.
Boy, when I did my Michigan State preview for the season and I saw they lost Jeremy Bernard and what he was like, what kind of a recruit he was, and considering they lost a guy like Keon Coleman and then, of course, their quarterback, Peyton Thorne, I'm like, that's going to hurt. Although he didn't really get that much time on the field, I kind of knew it was going to hurt, and I looked up where he was going. Oh, man, that wide receiver room is going to be loaded this season. So let's talk about more about this 2023 team. They're ranked 10th in the country to kind of start things out in a Pac-12 that's going to be very fun to watch. Washington has to play USC this season. They got to play Oregon. There's going to be some tough games. There's going to be some really good games. Is this a Washington team? We talked about offense, but maybe some other parts of their team as well. Running game. We talk about defense. Are those parts that can come along where this Washington team could maybe win the Pac-12, maybe go to the college football playoff?
Yeah, absolutely. So the toughest stretch that needs to be considered outside of the Oregon matchup, which is going to be October 14th, and there's a very, very strong chance that both teams are going to go into that 5-0. Outside of that matchup, there's a 3-game stretch in November, really 4, because as much as we bagged on Stanford's football program earlier in the show, there's always some weird things that happen in the library. There really are. And so the Huskies have to go on the road to Stanford, and then they go on the road to USC. Not easy.
Yeah.
And then after USC, they immediately come home to play Utah, who is just an underrated, always scrappy, great defense, just a fantastic opponent. And then after that, they have to travel to Corvallis to play Oregon State, who are one of the most underrated teams in the country this year. It's going to be an absolutely brutal stretch. And if the Huskies can come out of that stretch 3-1, because I'm going to count the Stanford game in this, if they can come out of that 3-1, potentially 4-0, there's no question in my mind that this is going to be a team that contends for the college football playoff.
Boy, yeah, you mentioned, like, I remember watching, I think that was the COVID season where DJ Uiagalelei had to played because Trevor Lawrence, I think, was out with COVID. He came and played Notre Dame and played awesome. Now they lost the game, but he played really, really good. So if he can maybe get that back at Oregon State, and Oregon State was a pretty solid team last year, who knows what can happen. Really excited about what can maybe go down in the Pac-12 this season. It's going to be fun. Washington is going to be right at the center of it. So, we've kind of bagged on Michigan State a little bit so far. Let's do it some more, why don't we?
Let's do it.
So we got Michigan State the second half of a home and home last season. It was up in Seattle in your neck of the woods. This year, coming to the great state of Michigan in East Lansing. Michigan State, we mentioned, loses Peyton Thorne. They lose the great receiver Keon Coleman going over to Florida State. And then you looked at how stacked Washington is. How do we kind of break this game down? Going to East Lansing, you're getting the Big Ten treatment with a game only on Peacock, by the way. So those are some games you might have to get used to, by the way, coming into the Big Ten.
As the child of an NBC employee, I'm fine with that. I have no issues with that.
Okay.
But that's, and I'm actually very interested in that, because that's going to be a really fun experiment to see how the whole Peacock thing plays out as a whole. But no, it's something where I didn't get a chance to do it a couple of years ago, but I just heard nothing but rave reviews about when the Huskies traveled to Ann Arbor to play Michigan in 2021. And while the result of that game we're not going to talk about, the atmosphere is something that's going to be really, really cool. And going to East Lansing is going to be an awesome experience. I do think that that's a matchup that the Huskies can win just very handily, just with the offensive firepower that team has. It's not going to be an easy game. Right. I will say that, but I think that with the offensive firepower that this team has, the way they can throw the ball and the way they just threw the ball all over the yard last year against this Mel Tucker defense, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens again.
So here's the thing about Michigan State right now is their offense, it looks like, is going to be more predicated on the run game. Okay, Jalen Berger comes back, was not an 1,000-yard back. They get a transfer in Nate Carter from UConn. The receivers are very, very fresh, very new. Like I said, no Keon Coleman. Jaden Reed is in the NFL with the Green Bay Packers, I believe. And then that secondary, like the front seven for Michigan State is what people, including myself, really think is going to be good, really think is going to be better this season. But, man, that secondary still has a lot of questions. And, look, you're going to get, Michael Penix. Here's the thing about that front seven and that pass rush. You can get in there, but Michael Penix, he can definitely move around and kind of make room and get outside the pocket, throw the football. Boy, you match up these receivers, and you mentioned how good they are against the secondary once again for Michigan State. I still believe that it spells bad news for the Spartans even being there. Is it going to be 40-10? Maybe not. But I still think Washington is going to come out on top. And as you mentioned, that Michigan series. So Washington has kind of gotten used to the Big Ten lifestyle, at least with the state of Michigan teams over there. All right, let's move on to this. What do you think Washington needs to do this season? Because they're not going to have Michael Penix this year. McMillan is able to go to the NFL draft after this season. So there's going to be some talent that's there. It's going to be dropping off a little bit at Washington. What do they got to shore up this year to make sure that they're ready for the grind of that 9-game Big Ten schedule once we get to 2024?
No, that's a really great question. So there's a lot that is going to need to be addressed for the 2024 season. And it's something that I've actually been posting a lot about on Inside the Huskies. Check it out. Where there's a lot of talent on this team. And so the one guy that I really want to highlight, I talked about the receivers a little bit, but the one guy that I really want to highlight is quarterback Austin Mack, who right now should be at Folsom High School down in California and on the cusp of receiving his 5th star from 247 Sports. Instead, he decided to reclassify, enroll early, was still ranked as a top 75 player in the country by 247 Sports. And, oh man, Michael Penix had a bit of a sore arm last week, took a couple days off from practice, and he just the arm talent of that kid is unbelievable. I don't know if he starts next year because Dylan Morris is the incumbent. He will be technically the incumbent guy. There's another transfer in Will Haskell who came over from San Diego State. We haven't really seen him because he needs to redshirt this season. But obviously everything starts with the quarterback. The wide receivers are going to be fine. Jamarcus Shepard, as Purdue fans know, is one of the best receiver coaches in the country. He is going to have that room steady. The offensive line will be shored up. Both tackles might be off to the NFL, and Trey Fautano and Roger Rosengarten. That's going to be something that needs to be shored up. But that's something where offensive line coach Scott Huff he just prides himself on making sure that everybody on his offensive line is able to play multiple positions. There's a lot of talent on the line, and that's something that I think will be totally fine. My biggest question personally is in the pass rush, because there are going to be at least 3 guys off the NFL this year. Tuli Gasanoa is a defensive tackle. He's out of eligibility. Braylon Trice will probably be a first-round pick. I believe this is his last year of eligibility as well. He might have one more, but he is just getting ranked in top 5 edge rusher groups by most NFL draft experts. And then Zion Tupuola-Fatui, who had just a spectacular season in 2020. He suffered some injuries since then, so he struggled a little bit in getting back on the field, but he will also be off the NFL after this year. So the pass rush is something that needs to be shored up. One guy who I would definitely recommend keeping an eye on is a transfer from the University of Sioux Falls. Kalen DeBoer's alma mater, by the way.
Let's go,
just little factoids for all you Midwesterners out there. He is just a freak of nature athletically. There are some things that need to be worked around with his NCAA transfer waivers, as that's a whole can of worms that us Husky people have to deal with right now. The main one being he spent 1 semester at North Dakota State as a student, not a football player, in the fall of 2020. So that's holding up his eligibility right now. But there are a couple guys that I really, really enjoy watching, and I'll just rattle off some names here really quickly for all you Big Ten fans. I won't go into all the particulars because I'd be here all day. One of them is Voy Tanufi. He's just a super talented pass rusher. The other 2 are Maurice Himes, who originally came over from Germany, just oozes with traits, was really raw when he got here, played a couple of years at Santa Margarita Catholic down in the old Trinity League, as I'm sure some Big Ten fans have gotten to know really well. And then another one is Lance Holtzclaw, just another super athletic, really exciting pass rusher. But outside of Tanufi, these guys haven't really played a lot of college snaps. So there are a lot of questions there. But if they can just prove this year to at least be serviceable players as redshirt freshmen for the most part, for most of those guys, then there's going to be a lot to be excited about going forward for this team as well.
So kind of going back to rivalries here, we got John chiming in. I wasn't super
I,
stoked about
I love
Oregon and
this.
Washington, but I've come around. And this next part, I'm sure you're going to love. I can't wait for my Badgers to grind Oregon into that Midwestern dirt. Washington, I respect, of course. We've got our guy Greg chiming in as well. How about you? Do we talk about rivalries? And I'm going to mention later on during the show what kind of rivalries do you think could be formed with some of these other Big Ten teams? How about UW versus UW, Wisconsin and Washington?
I'm going to say this right now, and all you Wisconsin fans out there, I really want to come out to Madison and party. I hear great things. But Washington is the real UW. Come on.
Oh, boy. So the match has been has been lit here on the Big Ten TED live stream. I'm from Wisconsin. I've enjoyed a couple of pre-games over in Madison, so it does not disappoint. Let me tell you that one. HD90 Dog chiming in as well. As an Iowa fan, many beatings from Washington in the Rose Bowl. You know, this is kind of something that has gone on. If you look at the Big Ten over the course of the Rose Bowl and the history, when you had that Big Ten, Pac-10 matchup, the Big Ten obviously had some really good teams. You look at Iowa, Hayden Fry. You look at Bo Schembechler. You look at Woody Hayes at Ohio State, of course. But the Pac-10, a lot did very well. Kind of summarize for maybe those that don't know, maybe Washington's history against maybe some of the Big Ten teams here in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely do that. So I won't go all the way back to UW beating Minnesota for the national championship in 1960 because that's a little far back, and that's where Oregon fans just come in and say, "Oh, they were still playing with leather helmets back then." We're not going to get into that. But the one thing that I really do want to highlight is when Washington was just making all the Rose Bowls in the late 80s, early 90s, and because I don't care about Miami fans' feelings at all. Washington won 4 of the 5 polls in 1991 and are the real national champions of that year. And they beat Michigan very handily to do so. I'm sure Michigan fans don't like the image of Mario Bailey, one of the best receivers in UW history, getting up and flashing the Heisman. That's one of the best defenses of all time, the 91 Huskies, led by Steve Huntman, who's the number 1 overall pick in the 1992 NFL draft. Obviously didn't have the best NFL career after being picked by the Colts. A lot of injuries kind of got in the way. But, there's a really long history, and, it's still kind of going on. We talked about the recent matchups with Michigan and Michigan State. The 2019 Rose Bowl against Ohio State was, although it didn't go Washington's way, was one of the coolest and just most amazing environments and games I've ever been to in my life. And just that matchup and everything about that with Ohio State was just so cool to witness. And again, and more recent history where, I can talk about UW's successes, the 2001 Rose Bowl where Marcus Tuiasosopo just single-handedly beat Drew Brees and Purdue.
Yeah. Nice. So there's been some success. Appreciate our guy Jared Jones for the super chat here. Some Ohio State fans. He's going to catch the replay, but I very much appreciate the support from Jared here for the channel as we continue on here tonight on the show. Really excited this conversation here with Roman here tonight from Washington. So solid history. We've been talking about the history a little bit of Washington. We can dive into that a little bit. Of course, we talked about the national championship in 1991. Great season. We talked about the early to mid 80s as well. Don James is out there as well. So the history, this is not some team coming in out west with little to no history. There is history of good football from the Washington Huskies. Do you think that's history that they can build upon and will help them as we approach the Big Ten? Because this is a team that I think can build off of this a little bit.
So this is a great question that you ask, because this is the entire debate between Husky fans and Oregon fans on Twitter. This is seriously just everything in a nutshell, where Washington fans have always said, this is like the tradition of this program is second to none. And Big Ten fans are going to get a chance to see that firsthand, because especially if Kalen DeBoer hangs around for a long time, which I truly feel like he will, there's a lot that can be built. And we've already seen just kind of some of the things that he's been able to instill just over a year and a half of being a part of this program. And it's something where he has just invited so many alumni back to the program, and he's just getting rave reviews from truly everybody inside the program. He's a very genuine person, just a really, really nice guy who understands everything that it takes to win. And it's something where there are a lot of pictures that are posted from inside the Husky locker room, it's all about tradition. There are pictures of every single player the Huskies have entered, have gotten into the NFL. There are pictures of the Rose Bowl. There's if you walk down the tunnel to the media room, there are pictures of every single bowl game lining the walls. It's so cool. There truly aren't many traditions like there are at Washington.
Yeah, I'm excited about the history. The more I kind of dive into this in the history, the more I really appreciate Washington. Maybe goes back a little bit further than Oregon as well. I'm sorry, I got to put this up. I'm sorry, I got to do it. We got some Duck fans in the chat here tonight, but it's all well and good. I'm excited for this rivalry. Said it earlier in the show. I'm excited for it. Met some great Oregon fans after the conversation over there with Doug Scott from the QB 11 show. So what are your thoughts on that? We kind of talked about Kalen, Stanford a little bit, the Pac-12. Let's kind of dive into that a little bit. Kind of came crumbling down. Of course, yeah. Of course, as of recently. Are you going to miss it? Are you excited? Are you more excited about the move to the Big Ten than you are sad about other than the Pac-12 kind of going away? Your memories? What's kind of all the Washington fans in a nutshell feeling about what's happened to the Pac-12?
So that's a very good question. Where there's definitely a portion of the fan base that's tradition, this and that. Where it sucks that this is going away. It sucks that that's going away. I personally think that this is an awesome thing for the program as a whole. And I said it on Locked On Huskies a couple of days ago. You either sink or you swim at this point in college football. And this is a move made by the athletic department to stay alive and to stay relevant in the world of college football. And I don't just appreciate that from the standpoint of my job. I just appreciate that as someone who likes watching good football and moved out here to watch good football and to watch this program turn into what it has under Kalen DeBoer. And it truly, when he got hired, there was the feeling of, this could be a really solid hire. Nobody thought that this is what it was going to turn into in year one. And everything that he's been able to help this program get to, because I want to talk a little bit about just like my own personal history with Washington. I mentioned that I grew up in Los Angeles. So my whole history, my dad is an alumni of the University of Washington, which is kind of where a lot of my passion for the program comes from. And we went to the first game that I went to was during Washington's 0-12 season at USC, where they lost 56-0, and there were 3 first downs recorded by the Huskies in that game. So I've seen it all, and it's something where I grew up watching this team play USC and UCLA. That's what I got to grow up watching in person. So that stays alive for me. And yeah, I'll miss the just chaos that happens when they play at Arizona and Arizona State. Utah is a really awesome place to go play. And Boulder, Colorado is gorgeous. Oregon State, going to Corvallis, I hear good things. I haven't been myself just yet. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And if they can keep everything alive with Washington State, also awesome. That's great. Those are the traditions that truly need to be kept alive. And this is no disrespect at Arizona, Arizona State, or at Stanford and Cal, that falls by the wayside. But that's really what, for the majority of the Pac-10, Pac-12, all of it, USC, UCLA, and Washington have really carried that crown for a majority of the time. So being able to still see that every year is something that makes me really happy.
So I'm glad Oregon and Washington are in. I'm glad it's not just 2 schools out west playing a bunch in the Midwest and the East. I'm glad there's some semblance of some of these other games kind of staying around as well. You look at the Arizona schools that are now going to the Big 12. Remember back before they joined the Pac in the late 70s, they were in the WAC. With teams like the BYUs and the Utahs and things like that. So that set of I think those rivalries make more sense. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think the Arizona schools really developed a lot of rivalries in the Pac from what maybe there were good series and good games, but rivalries per se, did Arizona really develop anything in the Pac?
Not for the most part. Yeah, they had their moments of being good, but it's not. Yeah. It was never any. And last year, highly recommend if you just want to watch an all-out passing attack. Watch the 2022 replay of Washington and Arizona. Game finished 49-39. Michael Penix threw for the most yards in school history in a single game. It was just a mad game to be at. It was awesome. But it's not like, there's extra behind this because the Arizona Wildcats are in town. No disrespect intended.
I think they fit. I think the way things have ended up with the Pac, I think it's fine. I think the Arizona schools work better with the Colorados and the Utahs and the BYUs and all that. So I think that's going to develop into something. I think Colorado and Arizona, since Colorado joined the conference and the Pac, I think maybe developed into a little bit of something, if I remember correctly. So I think it all is figuring itself out. I want to go to a series of comments in the chats that kind of really sparked my mind for maybe a talking point here. First, let's talk. Lewis Smith says Duck football really started within the last 20 years. Okay. And then we've got our Oregon fan in the house saying the 94 Rose Bowl was the start of the rise of Oregon football. Now, of course, this, and I had Doug on the show last week. Of course, you have the contributions of Phil Knight, and in the mid 2000s, they really began to ramp it up. What was what was Oregon and Washington really like before this, that kind of happened with Oregon? And where do we kind of view Oregon I know you're going to have a biased thought on this, so try to keep it as Switzerland as possible, as much as you can. But where do you think Oregon, from a rival standpoint, kind of a little bit north, are going to be able to go in the Big Ten?
I really do think that this is a great move for Oregon.
Yeah.
It's something where I'm going to make lots and lots and lots of comments over the years about Uncle Phil's money, because that's still very, very true. But no, in all seriousness, Oregon can be a really, really fun football program. They are a national football program.
Yep.
Are they a very recent program? Also, yes. Oregon football didn't start until 1994. Let's be very real about that.
Hey, the Duck fan himself said that, so I think we'll go with it.
I respect that some of them have that self-awareness. Not all of them do, but there's a lot that Oregon can do, and they already have the national reach. You see them pulling 4- and 5-star recruits out of Missouri and Florida every other year, where that's already something they can do. And now it's going to be really, really fun to see them compete every year, because it's something where, I hope they lose basically every game. Right. I won't lie about that. Absolutely. But it's also something where when they're competitive, they really do make not only West Coast football better in the RIP era of the Pac-12, but we saw them go into Ohio State and win. They can compete with the best, truly.
Yep. They are a national program. That's what excites me about Oregon, is just how, like you said, Nike and the contributions and just what they've developed into over the years, especially under Chip Kelly, and now it looks like under Dan Lanning, the recruiting at a really high level. Let's talk about recruiting, and let's talk about bringing in talent for just a minute, because now Washington is... Obviously, they've been going up head-to-head against the Oregons, against the USCs and UCLAs of the world. How do you think that they're going to stack up in terms of bringing in talent now when you talk about Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nebraska's doing good in the top 25? How do you think they'll kind of stack up in terms of bringing in that talent?
So recruiting took a major dip under Jimmy Lake. Yep. There's no secret about it. But Kalen DeBoer was able to bring this program back in just 1 year as a recruiter. And the class finished, I believe, 29th overall, according to 247 Sports in 2023. And go look at the class. There's a lot of, I'm a big recruiting tape guy.
Yep.
That's a big portion of my job. And while the ranking, and that's one of the things that Oregon fans love to bag on, is Washington's class of 2024 isn't necessarily very high in the rankings, but do they bring in the right people? I know that there are a lot of people out there who love the NFL. So I'm just going to put this out there, because my favorite Husky of all time was an unranked 3-star recruit by the name of Vita Vea, who just so happens to be the second best defensive tackle in the NFL, because I won't put anybody above Aaron Donald on any day. Oh, no. And that's something that Washington has always prided themselves on being able to do. And one of the many reasons that Chris Peterson did retire or step away from football was because he learned what it was able to finally be like to recruit at a high level. And he brought in the number 15 and 16 classes overall in 2019 and in 2020. And I just, if anyone wants to go pull up those pages right now, you will see that a lot of those guys are the key contributors on this Husky team. So this team, when they are able to recruit, and I think that the 2023 class is a great sign of where this Husky team and this Husky program is going as just recruiters. Courtney Morgan, as Michigan fans know, is one of the best director of player personnel, football operations people in the country. He has done a phenomenal job in evaluating talent. And I won't go into all the specifics about recruiting because I could talk all night. Yeah. But there's a lot of just talent evaluation and guys that you go and you turn on the film and you say, oh, wow. Oh, this guy's coming to Washington. Yeah. No, this dude's going to be a player.
All right, let's talk about where the Huskies fit in. We talked about recruiting maybe going up against some of the powers in the Big Ten. I put out a tweet about the tiers that I think once we get to 18 teams in 2024, where teams could be. Not saying that this is where they will be, but where teams could be. I kind of had Washington, Ohio State and Michigan have really separated themselves in the Big Ten since Penn State won the Big Ten title in 2016. Nobody else besides the Wolverines and the Buckeyes have been able to take it home. I had kind of Washington in a high tier 3 type of thing, maybe with the Wisconsins, the Iowas, something like that. I think they're on the high end of that. Where do you think Washington, and I know this team in 2023, we talked about this before, is going to look different than it will in 2024, of course, but maybe over the first 3 to 5 years in the Big Ten, where do you think, who can they kind of stack up with in terms of tiers and the hierarchy of this conference?
So that's a great question, because the second you said, because I didn't see that tweet, but the second you said that, I was like, oh, this could be a low-end tier 2 team in terms of recruiting. Because when Washington wants a player, there is a very good shot that they're going to get. And we're moving into a new age of Washington recruiting as well, because a lot of coaches on the staff have Midwest ties, and that's something where we're starting to see them get their foot in the door here. We can talk about Ohio State's Lincoln Kienholz, who has committed to Washington for a very long time. You're welcome, Buckeye fans, for doing all the evaluation and all of the work for that. And I think that kind of speaks to what Washington is able to do on the recruiting trail, where when they first evaluated and offered Lincoln Kienholz, his best offers were North Dakota State, Wyoming, and Wisconsin. And again, no disrespect to Wisconsin, but the offers weren't necessarily great. And then you kind of started hearing things a little bit closer to signing. You're like, oh, Ohio State wants this guy, and they're probably going to get him. And kind of saw how everything turned out with the Huskies getting Austin Mack, like I talked about a little bit earlier on the show. But especially with the cash infusion that the athletic department is going to see from from even just a partial share over these next couple of years of being in the Big Ten, that there are a few official visits like there are at Washington, because we talked about sailgating. They get to take a boat, they get to go hang out on the water, They get a big seafood boil. I'm not a seafood guy personally, but I'm sure a lot of people love the crab and the lobster and all that. So there's a lot to be desired when you take an official visit here to Montlake.
I mean, you look at the last couple of years, Oregon and USC have had recruiting ever since Lincoln Riley got there. They've had recruiting classes, in the top 10 in the country. But it's just Washington and UCLA. I just don't. You mentioned the cash infusion, and that's something to think about as well. As we can, because it's very hard to predict. I put these tiers together. I said that's why I really highlighted the word could. This is what could happen going forward. What if Washington goes out, they win the Pac-12, they get to the playoff? Who knows? Maybe Michael Penix is just that much better where they get to the national championship game. I know to maybe college football fans outside the Big Ten, maybe outside the Pac-12, that sounds crazy right now, but it could happen. What if that happens and all of a sudden people are like, whoa, okay, so that team's joining the Big Ten in 2024? That's a Power 2 team? I think it goes for a lot of these teams. You have a guy that Big Ten fans know from recruiting. We were just talking about recruiting. Dante Moore is being the starting quarterback, it sounds like, down at UCLA. What if he lights it up his freshman year and now all of a sudden Chip Kelly hasn't done great in recruiting? Now he's done really well in the portal, but not recruiting. It's just there's so many what ifs with all these West Coast teams. And then you mix them in with these Midwest powerhouses that we're seeing. And it's just, I just don't know. It's just the cash infusion right now is a big, because we know all about the Pac-12 and where they've been in terms of exposure and these late night games where people don't have their eyeballs on them. And that's kind of where I want to segue now into my next point. Fox CBS, NBC. We talked about Peacock there for just a little bit. But now let's kind of dive into this a little bit. Now you're Fox, CBS, NBC. Those networks, the Big Ten is the primary college football product on those networks. It's not like ESPN, where we were a secondary product to the SEC. They really went all in on the SEC, of course, over the last handful of years. How is being on Fox, CBS, NBC, those prime networks, those prime spots, going to help Washington, do you think, in the future? Oh, he's ready to go for this answer.
So this is something that I have a very long history with already.
Okay.
So for me, I went to school out in Boston. I spent the prime era of the Chris Peterson years watching everything in Massachusetts. And people didn't necessarily care for the most part, even when this was a top 5 team in the country, because people didn't want to stay up until 10:30 p.m. out there to watch them play, which was maddening for so many reasons. But, and again, this is when they went to 3 straight New Year's Six Bowls, but this is just such a huge benefit for the program. You just say, okay, they're going to be in this slot, they're going to be in that slot. And it's something where I just kind of, whenever this conversation came up with anybody, it was just kind of like, no, you just actually need to watch this team. I don't care about your sleep. I don't care about this. I don't care about that. You actually just need to sit down and watch, because then you'll realize what's actually happening here and what this program can be. So this is such a huge benefit for the Huskies.
I know. I'm so excited to see, because that's been the thing I talked about Doug last week about the Pac-12 network and just how, and then comparing that to the Big Ten network. He mentioned that when the announcement was made, they were putting up graphics of the history of how many gold medalists and all of these championships that each team has won, and you can't even get the Pac-12 network on DirecTV out west. Here's the thing about the late night kickoff slot that I will say. People have floated around the idea about the Big Ten adding more revenue in a Big Ten After Dark time slot. I am vehemently against that, because I think that, and I want to hear what you have to say about this, having experience with that late night time slot, that 10 o'clock Eastern, 10:30 Eastern, whatever you want to call it, time slot, because I think that's part of the reason why maybe these teams like USC first and UCLA first made the jump, is because when they're stuck in that time slot, nobody besides maybe the fans on the West Coast are watching them. You look at the Midwest time zone, the Eastern time zone, right? That big chunk of the country, they're not staying up to watch West Coast football, and thus West Coast football doesn't maybe get the attention it deserves. I want to hear your take on that.
This is just something we've heard for years. There are definitely things that I would personally hate about still having to kick off at 7:30, mainly the getting home at 1:30 in the morning part of that. I'm vehemently against that part of it. But no, it would be great for the Big Ten to just, for lack of a better term, just monopolize the football, just watching of
the day.
That'd be awesome. But there are certain things where it's just kind of like, this would still be really tough, because there are fans who just kind of refuse with the 7:30 time slot because of what I just mentioned. It's horrible. Just getting in traffic at 11:30. Obviously, I have to stay after and do interviews, press conferences, all that sort of stuff. But there are fans who refuse to, who are coming down from, like, I know this, I'm getting into Northwest geography here, but like Bellingham, Washington. There are a lot of big fans in the area, but that's an hour and a half, 2 hour drive. Nobody wants to make that at 11:30 at night, and I don't fault them for doing that. But there is an upside and a downside to that.
Like, I could see, like, if you went with the Big Ten After Dark time slot, there's going to be fans out. There's Ohio State fans. There's going to be fans, Penn State fans, where it's like, what? I got to watch this game at 10:30 at night, 11 o'clock at night. And it goes the other way, too. I totally get that. Big noon Saturday, big noon kickoff. You want a 9 a.m. game in Los Angeles? I don't think you're going to be seeing a lot of big noon games on the West Coast. But then again, you might have to. Like, let's throw it down the other way. 9 a.m. kickoff. First of all, how much do you get? I assume you don't get them very much, obviously, on the West Coast. But now,
never get them.
You never do. I would assume that, but I just wanted to make sure. But now you could. I'm not saying you will. I think they're going to schedule it. But what if you have the potential of Washington's a top 10 team and Michigan's a top 10 team, and Fox is the rotation for the top game that week, 9 a.m. games. I mean, what do you think about that going forward on the West Coast?
I don't think that that's something that's going to happen very often, if ever, to be totally honest, because that's just something where I think that, especially with that, I know it's kind of nitpicking if we're going to talk about a particular scenario, but that's something where I feel that I know this is going to backfire within a couple of years, but I trust the network to kind of say, ooh, we like this. We're going to make sure that this is in a spot where everybody's going to see it.
Right. Yeah, and that's, I think, you want to take advantage of those West Coast programs. I think they're going to be playing in that CBS time slot, which is 3:30 Eastern, around noon, out on the West Coast. And then, of course, I think the one thing that you guys are probably most excited about is that NBC time slot. Right.
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
That's 7. I think it's like 7:30 Eastern. I think it's what it's going to be. That's going to be that kind of mid-afternoon, eventually going to night over there on the West Coast, kind of like the Rose Bowl is over there. So I'm excited. Sounds like you are as well, from this television standpoint.
I've got one more thing on just that perfect 4:30 p.m. Eastern time slot.
Yeah.
And I'm just, it's the theme of the show here. That's what the kickoff time was against Michigan State last year. Everything was perfect. It didn't get any better than that.
Yeah, exactly. Some good stuff here tonight. I had a comment that I got to go find that. Here we go. Roman is talking recruiting. Does he think the Big Ten helps or hurts that? I think we kind of touched on that before, but kind of answered this thought kind of. I guess we maybe talked about how they stacked up in the Big Ten, but I don't know if we covered this. I think it can only help from my point of view.
This absolutely helps.
But you kind of elaborate on that.
So this is something I've heard from multiple sources where recruits were starting to ask, and from what I've heard, there were schools that were saying, well, if you come here instead, you're going to be in the Big Ten. Washington's still in the Pac-12, and it's something that multiple members of the Huskies' current recruiting class have already just said, yeah, no, we're really excited to play on this stage. So this is absolutely going to help, because the Huskies were already, especially just in this new Kalen DeBoer era, were already finding a way to make waves in the recruiting field as it is, and now just saying, all right, well now you're going to be able to go play against the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Penn States of the world. This can do nothing but help, and you still get that big stage, and you don't necessarily have to worry about I'm going to get tucked away on this program, because that's something that when I talk to some of the people that I do in the NFL draft world as it is, they still, one of their biggest knocks on Braylon Trice, just to bring up an example on the current team, is, he's going against Pac-12 tackles. Okay, not anymore.
Nope, not anymore.
Well, not him in particular, but that's something just that moving forward.
Right, yeah. That's a lot of these West Coast conversations are going to be, because I had this conversation. I had a USC guy on the stream a couple of weeks ago, and he's saying, I think the national narrative is that the Pac-12 plays a lesser brand of football, and coming over to the Big Ten, it's a more physical type of conference. Let's kind of steer this in that direction. The Big Ten is known for its physicality. It's known for good defense. It is a physical and mental grind in a 9-game schedule. How do you think Washington, it's going to crack you up. Let's get into it. How do you think Washington is going to, and I think this goes for all the teams, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. I've said this before, where I think the current 14, those historical Big Ten teams, yes, maybe Rutgers. Maybe if I wouldn't put Rutgers and Maryland as historical Big Ten teams, but they're still Big Ten members. We still got it. We still got to love them. I think these teams got to meet in the middle, right? You have these physicality teams, the Iowas, the Wisconsins, that have been physical over the years. And then you have these offenses over there, the Caleb Williams, the Bo Nix, the Michael Penix. These teams can put up points. They're going to have to meet in the middle. These defenses, these secondaries are going to have to get a lot better from these existing teams. And I think the Pac-12 teams coming in are maybe going to have to get a little bit more physical. How do you kind of view that all coming together?
That's exactly what I was going to say. One of my favorite memes that I saw on Twitter before this whole Oregon Washington thing happened was if USC had to go play at Wisconsin in November and they see them line up in the Power I, they don't know what any of this is, and they're going to be terrified. But that's just going to be the exact same thing when some of these Big Ten schools are going to see some of these offenses that Lincoln Riley and Kalen DeBoer are able to put together, because they can throw for 450 yards if they want to. And yeah, there's some of the offensive line talent is getting to that point. Oregon in particular has been Excellent. I have to address this comment really quick because come on, they were doing that anyways. I'm not giving Oregon any credit on the recruiting trail for that.
Of course not.
But no, it's something where Oregon has recruited along the offensive line very well for a couple of years now, and that's something where I can talk about not Jalen Clem, his father Adrian Clem, the now Patriots offensive line coach, where they recruited very well there, and Oregon was able to put together an offensive line that went toe to toe with Ohio State. They did a very good job of that. But that's something where, and that was also a lot of credit needs to go to Mario Cristobal, who put together an awesome offensive line in his time there. And that's the only thing I will ever give Mario Cristobal credit for in his life. That's it. But there's absolutely a level of the front seven that needs to be improved for a lot of these teams. But that's something where, the secondary was a big part of this, but some Big Ten fans may forget that during the Chris Peterson era, Washington had arguably the best defense in the country year in and year out. I don't care what Alabama fans have to say. I don't care what some of those
we don't either.
team looks like. Yeah, good. We're on the same page there.
Let's talk. Okay, let's talk about this whole weather thing. Okay. Washington first of all, I've never been to I've been to a lot of states out west. Have not been to Washington, even though a trip to North Cascades National Park could be in the mix for next summer.
I would recommend.
Yeah, okay. What's the weather like? Does it get snow down there in the winter months, or just how cold does it get in the Washington area?
So it definitely snows. It definitely gets cold.
Sure.
Snow is a little bit rare here in the Seattle area. You get it once every couple of years, and it snowed a lot this past winter actually. But before that, it had snowed once in my time here. I've lived here for about 4 years now, and so it gets cold. It does rain in October, November, and there are some weird weather patterns that we see up here. There was a 2019 game against Cal, which we won't talk about the result, but the game was actually delayed 3 hours due to a lightning storm. That was a really, really wild scenario. But there is some weird weather up here. There was an atmospheric river. I don't know what that is, so please, nobody in the comments ask. I can't tell you. But so that happened in the Oregon State game last year, and it actually caused a power outage in the stadium. The Huskies have since changed to LED lights at the football stadium. But no, so there is some weird weather up here at times that teams do need to be prepared for.
Okay, so I'm not too worried about the Pacific Northwest teams. Like you said, Washington is used to it. Not sure what it's like out there in Oregon. But a lot of people when the SoCal schools joined, it says, we got to get them. I might go a couple of different ways on this. So the SoCal, man, we got to get them in Minnesota. And I live in the Twin Cities. I know how cold it gets, and I'm going to get to that point here in just a minute. Okay, we got to get them in Minneapolis in November. We got to get them in Madison. We got to get them in Iowa. So here's the deal about weather. Okay, Minnesota, maybe Wisconsin are really Iowa and maybe Nebraska, those West teams. That's all you got to worry about, in my opinion. Second last week of the season, Iowa played Minnesota last year. It was in single digits, which is obviously very cold. It was a very cold day. It was a very cold night over in Minneapolis. But there are also, and that's the great thing about Midwest weather, there are some days, there are some weekends where it's 60 degrees, and the next weekend it's 20. So some years you might get it where it is 60. Some years you might get it where it's 20. And remember the last game of the season, you're probably going to see USC take on UCLA. Very interested to see how that Notre Dame dynamic is going to work out for USC. And then Oregon's going to play Washington. So in theory, the latest that you're going to play a Big Ten team is the third week in November. And trust me, being lived in Minnesota and Wisconsin, you can get those late 60-degree days. Is there any? Look, it's football. It's football. I get it, and I know it's Colorado, and I know Washington is cold. You're gonna get a cold game probably with a Minnesota, and now with more teams coming out west, I think you could see some of those teams kind of play later in the season. How do you view this whole weather dynamic? A lot of Big Ten fans really hyped it up, And we appreciate that. We love our weather games. We love our snow, all that stuff. But how do you kind of see this all going down? Is this a concern at all? I don't think it is for you guys, but kind of talk about the rest of the West Coast.
Not necessarily a concern for the Huskies, in my opinion. I think that, especially the USCs and the UCLAs, like I said, that's where I grew up. Yeah, moving to Boston, then moving into Seattle. I don't know what this is when things start falling from the sky. That blows my mind a little bit. But no, seriously, there's with Washington and Oregon, I think that the weather won't necessarily have a huge impact there. Yeah. But USC and UCLA, I think there really could be something there, especially because when you work out just all summer and all fall and it's just hot. There's a certain, as someone who grew up playing baseball, there's a certain dynamic that goes along with that, and then you got to go play and it's 40-45 degrees. It might not necessarily, once the adrenaline gets going, might not impact you mentally very much. But there are certain things that I think that we will kind of see just kind of, the weather really is impacting the way USC, UCLA might want to just go about their game plan.
Boy, I tell you what, that's what first people thought here in Big Ten country, and that's fine. First thing I thought of, as like, boy, wouldn't it be great, like for people here in like Minnesota or something, man, playing in Los Angeles? Late November? Sign me up for that. I kind of thought, I'm a positive guy. I usually not try to bring others down. So I'm like, sign me up for a trip to LA that late in the season. I want to get to some questions here. First thing, I have a take on this. We'll see if you do as well. There's rumors out there that the Big Ten Championship could be moved to Vegas. I got a video possibly coming out on that pretty soon. It's just the thing with Vegas. It is a true neutral site. I don't see the draw of really getting into Vegas. When you have SoFi Stadium, when you have the stadium here in Minneapolis, US Bank, when we've been playing the Big Ten title game in Indy. How do you kind of feel about that in terms of having a Big Ten championship game in Vegas? I know that was George Kliavkov's dream, being a Vegas guy, bringing the Pac-12 game to Vegas. But what's kind of your thought on a Big Ten title game possibly being in Vegas?
I'm sort of indifferent on the matter. I think it could be fun because when you look at like just for example the three stadiums you brought up, two of them are in Big Ten country, and SoFi is just in the heart of Los Angeles. Right. So why not? Like, sure, it's a true neutral site, but also it is a really cool new stadium from everything I've heard. It is.
So, I'd like to rotate around the Big Ten footprint because you look at SoFi. I left one out. Chicago's going to be building a new indoor stadium in place of. So they've kind of got in the suburbs. They might build one, but then Soldier Field is kind of coming back and says, "Well, wait a minute, we'll put a roof on our deal and renovate." So Chicago, which of course is where Big Ten headquarters are as well. So you got Chicago, you got Detroit, you got Minneapolis, you got Los Angeles, and Indianapolis. So there could be a rotation. Vegas. As long as it's in the rotation. If it were on standalone, I would not be a big fan of it. If it's in the rotation, could probably live with it.
That's what I was going to say. Rotation would be great.
Right. And that's what we do with basketball. We've had it in New York City. We've had it in Washington. Having it in Minneapolis these last couple of seasons, these basketball. We talked about this before, I think, but Brian Foster coming in. Is Washington usually a sellout?
Over the last couple of years, not so much, but I do have a feeling they're going to sell out every game this season. So I'm going to go with recent bias and say yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm excited. It's the greatest setting in college football. Who wouldn't want to be? Here it comes from Brian. I'll take a stab at this one first. Do you think the Big Ten will go to a 10-game conference schedule sooner rather than later? I think it's going to take more teams. I think they got to stay with 9. Even though a 10-game schedule does fit well, you could do a 3-7-7 format. Right now with 10 games. With 9, it gets a little bit more complicated. You could do something like 1-8-8. You could do like a 5-4-4, I think was the other scheduling format as well. So this is a big thing that I want to ask for you, because now if you down the road you were to add an extra Big Ten game, how does that affect maybe a Washington State rivalry? Is that something that kind of in the back of your mind that could be in jeopardy?
I would say so, but at the same point, if they become a Group of 5 school, I think that there's still just an argument to make sure that game happens.
Right.
And especially with the relationship that the athletic departments of both programs have, I think that they'd still be committed to trying to find any possible way to play that game.
It's interesting. Playoff coming up, of course, strength of schedule. There's no better way to really boost strength of schedule than play more games within your conference when you are a Power 2 league like the Big Ten. So that's gonna think. Let's talk about that playoff. 12 teams.
Yeah.
Do you think Washington can be maybe one of those teams? Because really, you got to get now with the Pac-12 disintegrating, it's likely going to be a 5 conference champions. Your 4 power leagues plus a G5. And then 7 at-large teams. Do you think Washington, is this kind of a goal for a team to be kind of at least on the edge of playoff contention?
No, absolutely. And like I talked about a little bit earlier, there's a lot of talent on the roster that's still somewhat unproven. But yeah, no, especially with the way this coaching staff has proven they can develop and get players into the right situations, I do think that there's a chance that they can find themselves with one of those at-large bids.
All right, we've been going back and forth here today, and we've got some here from our guy HD90 Dog. With all due respect, we've heard it before. You got to come and you got to strap it up. You got to prove it. And I'm excited to see this. I know there's been a lot of this kind of going back and forth, and this is what I love about the live shows, is seeing all this back and forth. That's what I really like about these live programs. I'm excited to see what these West Coast, because you got 2 contrast in styles. Really not only on the football field, but in life in general. And that's what I'm really excited to see. Any school in particular that you think, we kind of mentioned with maybe Wisconsin and Washington, the battle of the UWs, any stadium that you're looking in particular forward to going to, maybe a rivalry that you think could develop with existing Big Ten schools?
I'll be honest, I haven't thought a lot about rivalries,
okay,
but this is a conversation that we actually had a couple of weeks ago when a lot of members of the media, when these things were kind of on the precipice of being discussed and announced, was what are just some of the biggest trips? And both my parents have ties to Chicago, so I think that even though Northwestern might not necessarily be the best game atmosphere, no offense, that would be an awesome place to just kind of spend a couple days and go to the game and have all that happen. Penn State, I've heard nothing but wonderful things about as a football environment. Michigan, Ohio State, of course, are just places that I think would be really cool. I've heard Bloomington is gorgeous. Wisconsin, going to Minneapolis and seeing having that full experience as sort of a city guy myself, I think that would be really, really fun. But yeah, no, there are a lot of places that I don't necessarily know what rivalries will be like, because, obviously we talked about a lot of these teams have like playoff or just bowl history, but not necessarily very deep rooted, like, oh yeah, we don't like that school for whatever reason.
These things happen naturally. I always think it's curious to see ask some people of the new folks that are coming to the league who they think they'd want to see and what stadiums that they'd want to go to. But it happens naturally. I mean, look at Arizona State Athletic Director Ray Anderson saying that he's not going to go to Morgantown. And now all of a sudden Arizona State and West Virginia could butt into this rivalry because some guy put his foot in his mouth. It's just, you just don't know how these things are going to start. How about this? We got hockey here in the Big Ten. Any interest in a hockey program out there in Washington?
Washington has a club hockey team.
Okay. Are they good?
That's a great question.
I got to watch first. They have one. That's funny. I just don't know how they are. Here's Lewis Smith saying with Washington and Nebraska would be a natural rival with history.
That's a good one.
That's been kind of brought up before as well. Is there anything in particular? We've kind of mentioned a lot of different things here throughout on the field, kind of off the field. What excites you the most about being a future Big Ten member?
I just think that there's so much history and so much tradition. And yes, I'm taking shots at the Pac-12 when I say all these things, who pride themselves on being the Conference of Champions and whatever else, where there's actually a lot of deep history, especially when it comes to football. Because as we talked about a little bit before the show, all of this lives and dies with football.
It does. Yep.
So that's just really all of it. And because when Washington, and that's something where Chris Peterson did it to an extent, and Kalen DeBoer really is starting to take it to another level. When Washington takes football seriously, it can be one of the best programs in the country. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, in my opinion.
That's they've proven it before. And we've talked about that here on this program. That's what excites me really about Oregon and Washington, because I know what their ceiling can be. They can both be college football playoff. They can both be top 5 teams at their ceiling. They can both contend at that level. I've seen it. I've seen it with Pac-12 resources, and then we mentioned the money. We mentioned the Big Ten resources. Who knows what can happen kind of down the road as well. Really enjoyed this conversation tonight, Roman. Quickly here before we let you go, where can people find you? Where can people see you? There's a lot of, so take a deep breath because I know there's a lot of places that people can find you now. Let them know this is your time to shine.
Yeah, no, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at rtomashoff34. That's RTOMASHOFF34. And I write for Inside the Huskies, which you can find at si.com/college/Washington, or just Google search Sports Illustrated Washington Huskies. It'll take you to the site. I highly recommend bookmarking it because we update it every single day. We always have new content coming out there. And then Locked On Huskies is a new daily podcast. Feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. My DMs are open. So if you ever have any questions, any ideas, just seriously, feel free to shoot me a note. I'm always happy to help out however I can. That's si.com/college/Washington for Fan Nation, Sports Illustrated, Inside the Huskies, and Locked On Huskies, which you can just find everywhere you get your podcast. And please feel free to subscribe. Leave us a 5-star review. There's a lot of content like this, just a lot of energy, just a free, open discussion. It is shorter, but than this, which is just a fun way to just talk about a little bit of everything. So it's a little just injection of football, basketball, anything that you need into your, that sports itch that you crave every single day.
Yeah, and this is over the next year or so this season. I think I might have to dive into some of these future matchups, talking about Washington, USC, Washington, and Oregon. Might get a little bit of coverage here on this channel as well. Roman, I want to thank you for joining me tonight, and I'm sure we'll see you down the road.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you to Roman Tomashoff for joining us here tonight. Good stuff here on the Big Ten TED live stream. Want to thank everybody for coming along for the ride here tonight. Once again, our live Big Ten prediction show is going to be coming August 23rd at 8 Eastern, 7 o'clock Central, lining up some good guests for that one and a lot of good videos leading up to Nebraska and Minnesota, which is exactly 2 weeks from tonight. So, until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.